I got the original idea for this story, That Dreadful Church, from a picture. The picture was a painting of a church in the clearing, in the woods. The church was black. It was old. And you could see parts of the roof were missing. Someone is in the painting. It looks like they are walking toward the church. They look a bit sinister, dark, evil. The story that follows is what I came up with after looking at that picture. It is heavily influenced by H.P. Lovecraft. I hope you enjoy. And now, That Dreadful Church by E.T. Brother. My name is Dan Morris. I first laid eyes on that dreadful church on June the 5th, 13 years ago. I didn't realize it then, but I should have turned around and ran from that frightful place as fast as I could go and forgotten all about that church. Unfortunately, I didn't do that, and that church has haunted my dreams ever since. I'm sorry to say, it ended up driving me mad. I ended up spending 5 years in another dreadful place, the Pleasant View Mental Institution. That is a nice name, but it's not a nice place. It is an insane asylum, no matter what name you put on it. It is where they put all the loonies, which for a time I was. The things I saw inside that church quite literally drove me to the brink of madness, then shoved me into the abyss beyond. I spent 5 years in that mental institution. Then I finally recovered my sanity, in spite of the fact that I was in a mental institution. Not because of it. The mental institution I was in, I can't speak for all of them, but the one I was in was horrible. Even now, after the so-called Age of Enlightenment, the treatment I received while in the mental institution was pitiful. That should not have been the way it was, but it was at the Pleasant View Insane Asylum. Let's just call it what it is and be done with it. We can dispense with the niceties. There is no need for them. They still treat their patients like second-class citizens, and really not even that well. Most times, they treat the patients like they are subhumans. But enough about that. The story isn't about how I was treated at the mental institution. It is about the horrors that I lived through that day, at the hands of that dreadful church. I wish I had never seen it. Oh, how I wish I had not. But fate, twisted destiny, or something sinister showed me that church. And my life has never been the same since. I first glimpsed that church on a long walk through the woods near my home. I had never walked through that particular section of woods, even though I had lived in the same house for close to 20 years. It was in a large clearing. It seemed rather odd that a church should be there, or any other building for that matter, because there were no roads leading into the clearing, and it was a good ways away from any roads. Another reason that it was odd a church should have been there was because it was big, massive in fact. It was an old Gothic cathedral. The cathedral was definitely out of place, being where it was. It would have been better suited in a big city, not in the middle of the woods, with no big city anywhere around. The closest city of any size at all, and that is relatively small, is a town called Pleasant View, but that is 20 miles away. The first time I ever saw that dreadful church, I was quite surprised to find it. It was massive, as I already said, and it was solid black, which struck me as odd. I put that out of my mind, though, and began to make my way toward it. It was clearly not used anymore, because part of the roof was missing. It sat on top of a small hill that appeared to be man-made, and stone steps led up to the top. I approached the steps, looking at the church, and realized it was black because it had been built with dark stones. It was 3 stories tall. It had many windows and a tower that was probably double the height of the rest of the church. It also had numerous spires. It was surrounded by a tall black wrought iron fence, and there was a gate at the top of the steps. I walked up the steps, stopped, and looked around. The path from the steps to the front door of the church was clear and walkable, as if it was used frequently. I stood where I was for a moment, looking at the rest of the church grounds. It was clear. It wasn't overgrown. It appeared as if someone was keeping the grounds nice, even though they weren't keeping the church itself in good repair. That should have been a clear indication that something wasn't quite right. Unfortunately, it wasn't. I looked at the church. All the windows were missing, but I couldn't see into the church because the openings for the windows appeared to be covered up on the inside. I turned my attention to the gate. It was shut, but it wasn't locked. I walked to the gate, kept glancing at the church. I felt as if I was being watched, but I couldn't see anyone. I opened the gate, expected the hinges to squeal in protest, but it opened easily without a sound, as if it were oiled regularly. I walked through the gate, stopped, and looked around. My feeling of being watched was even greater now. I didn't see anyone, so I took a deep breath, shook my head, and walked to the front door. I looked at the door. It looked almost new. This definitely struck me as odd, since the rest of the church was old. I looked at the door for a moment, then reached for the doorknob. I expected it to be locked, but the knob turned easily in my hand. I pushed the door open. It swung open easily, and without a sound. I walked into the church, a thing I wish I had never done. But I didn't know the horrors that awaited me inside. Once I got inside, I looked around and discovered why I had not been able to see into the church. There were wood shutters over the insides of the windows. I could still see well enough, though, because even though the bottom windows were shuttered, the top windows were not, and the roof had many holes in it. There were shadows everywhere. Some of the shadows were so dark I couldn't see into them, but I could see around the church. The inside of the church was as massive as the outside suggested, and it was completely open. All the pews had been removed. The floor was a wide open space. I glanced at the ceiling. The church was twice as tall as it was wide, and the space above was open all the way to the arched ceiling. After looking up for several moments, I looked down, looked around the church, and took a few steps. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, in the shadows to my left. I looked that way, but didn't see a thing. I chalked it up to my imagination. I wish I had not. Maybe I could have still escaped if I had left right then. At least that's what I tell myself. But it is probably wishful thinking. It was probably too late to escape, even though I was only a few steps into the church. I'm certain it was too late to escape. It was too late from the second I set foot inside. I'm certain of that. In the darkest hours of the night, though, I always lie to myself and think if I had left right then maybe I might have been able to escape that dreadful church. I finally looked away from the shadows and looked around. Nothing seemed to be amiss. Everything was still, silent. After another moment, I began to walk. I heard slithering sounds to my right and caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I quickly turned my head, looked into the shadows. I didn't see a thing. I stood there for a moment, looking into the shadows. Nothing moved. I thought about leaving. I was beginning to get spooked. Then I decided not to let it get the best of me. I turned my head back to the front, looked around, then began walking forward. As I walked past every archway, on both sides, I glanced into the shadows, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. When I got to the back of the church, which was technically the front, several things happened almost simultaneously, which showed me I was in big trouble. The door slammed shut. It didn't just close, it slammed shut. Then all the upper windows began to go dark. I jumped and hollered out as the door slammed shut, then looked up at the upper windows as they began to go dark. All the inner shutters were being closed. They finished closing, plunging the church mostly into darkness. I screamed out in surprise and turned to run for the door, but stopped dead in my tracks. A cold chill ran through me. It almost felt as if my blood had turned to ice water. There was a heavy green fog near the door. There appeared to be hundreds of human-like shapes in the fog. They weren't human, though. Far from it. The bodies looked human, but the heads didn't. They were too big for one thing, and entirely the wrong shape. The heads appeared to have tentacles hanging from where the mouths should have been. The tentacles were moving all about in the fog. As I stood looking into the fog, their eyes began to glow red. Welcome to the church of the ancient ones. Prepare to see sights that will horrify you. A voice said from the fog. The voice was a low, deep voice. The fog began to move toward me, and the shapes in the fog moved with it. I turned toward the altar area, thinking that I could find a way out, but stopped in my tracks. Just in front of me, there were two red eyes. They were close to the ground. I heard claws clicking on the stone floor, as if a dog were walking toward me. Only the clicking was much louder than any dog could have made. The eyes moved toward me. Then they began to glow red, revealing a hideous creature. The creature was reptilian in looks. It had the head of a snake, the body of a lizard, but it had human-like hands with very sharp-looking claws. The creature opened its mouth, revealing a mouthful of sharp fangs and a reptilian tongue. The creature hissed at me, then began to reach for me. I turned around and began to run. I forgot all about the green fog until I saw it again. It was still moving toward me. I quickly turned to the right, ran through the closest archway, and ran into the opening. I looked around. I could see a little because of the red and green glows. I didn't see anything. The green fog kept coming my way. I could also hear the claws of the creature clicking on the floor. I saw the way appeared to be open, to the front and back of the church. I turned toward the back and began to run as fast as I could. As I got close to the back, a dark shape moved toward me. It was massive. I stopped running. The shadow moved toward me. At that moment, the green fog came into the opening behind me, lighting the opening in a strange greenish glow. The glow revealed the thing in front